Hey everybody, today we're going to make some cuts on the Bladerunner using the fence. I'll show you what worked and what didn't work for me. So what I'm going to try now is I'm going to remove the arm and I'm going to use a tape measure to measure from the blade to the fence. And I'm going to use a carpenter square to square up the fence with the tabletop. Sounds like a lot of work, so we'll give this a try and we'll see what kind of a cut we get. So removing the arm is real simple. There's a couple of nuts back here. Don't need any tools to loosen them or remove them. So I guess I would call them more knobs than nuts, I guess. So just spin these off the bolts, lift the arm out, and there we go. I'm just going to put these knobs back in place real quick just so I don't lose them. So that's how easy it is to take the arm off. So I'm going to start by installing the blade. This is the same blade that I had been using for all the other cuts. I'll take my tape measure and set it up so that it's about lined up at about 2.5 inches. So we want to actually get to 2 inches. So the nuts on the fence are pretty loose. So it'll slide pretty easily. Then I'm going to take my carpenter square and I'm going to take the short end and go right up against the front edge of the tabletop, and then I'm going to slide it, keeping this edge against the table, and the carpenter square is going to come in contact with the fence. It's touching right there and it's not touching right on this end. So as I continue to move the square, it slides the fence at a right angle to the front edge of the tabletop, and now it's hitting the tape measure. I hope you can see that. So I'm just sliding the fence and the tape measure until the tape measure gets to 2 inches. Now I'm just going to tighten the nuts, or the knobs. Keep calling them nuts. I guess knobs is maybe better. If I double check, the fence is square to the front edge of the table, and the tape measure is set 2 inches from the inside surface of the fence to this surface of the blade. So we're set up now, and actually that wasn't too bad to set that up. Let's make a cut and we'll see what happens. So for this next test cut, we're going to switch to a larger piece of wood. This is another scrap. Looks like it's out of a cabinet that somebody was getting rid of. We'll try this first cut to go this way. So let me move the camera and we'll get going. Alright, so that went pretty well, I think. It's an interesting piece of wood because it's kind of hollow core. You probably noticed that it took a little bit of extra time to get through the piece of particle board at the end, and then it zipped right through the middle, the hollow core portion, and then we slowed down again at the other end. So now if I take a tape measure and I measure, that's 1 15/16 inches. That's a little shorter than we were going for. Yeah, 1 15/16 inches in the middle. 1 15/16 inches. And on the end, a little bit closer, about a 32nd short of 2 inches. So let's get set up again and we'll try and reset the fence and see if we can make a more accurate cut. So I'm just going to double check. I haven't moved the fence since the last cut. Just want to make sure that the fence is indeed square to the front edge of the tabletop, and it looks real square to me. Now if I take the carpenter square and I go to the back edge of the table and I try and see if the fence is square to the back edge of the table, I find that it's not. So I guess there's a real question as to whether or not this front edge of the table is really square to the blade. That's what would need to happen there. So I've been taking a closer look at this and trying to figure out what's going on here and why the cuts aren't coming out as accurate as I would like. And I think I may have stumbled onto something. So let me show you. If I remove the blade and then I take this little plastic piece out, which exposes the mechanism where the blade is installed, and I zoom in. Okay, so it may be a little difficult to tell on the camera, but this bracket right here, when I look at it with my eyes, instead of it being perpendicular to the opening right here, instead of it being straight, it looks like it's like this a little bit. Of course, I'm exaggerating so you can understand what I'm trying to say here, but it looks like that bracket is tilted a little bit. And when I take a caliper and I measure the distance here and then slide it down to the back end, there is a gap there. So I believe my eyes are correct when I think that this piece is tilted a little bit. No gap, gap. So when the blade is installed again, instead of the blade being perpendicular to the workpiece as I'm moving it through the blade is actually a little like this, again exaggerated. So that has me wondering if that's indeed part of my problem. So when I turn the saw over, I see that there are 4 screws. One is right there, 1, 2, and then there's 2 more over here. Those 4 screws look like they hold the tabletop to this bottom assembly So you can see the product splits right along this line. So those 4 screws hold the table onto this bottom assembly, and the bottom assembly is where the motor is installed. So there may be a possibility of adjusting the position of the tabletop to this bottom assembly to try and square it up a little bit better. I don't know. That looks like it's a whole nother topic for another video. As I continue looking at the underneath part of the saw, I can see there's 4 other screws. One there, there's one in there, and there's a 4th one in there. And that may be, those 4 screws may be used to align the saw with this bottom base for the whole product. So perhaps there's a way to adjust the position of this as it sits in the base of the whole saw, so that when the tabletop is mounted using the 4 screws, everything is more in square. So that's beyond the scope of what I'm trying to do with this particular video, but who knows, I may explore this a little bit more in a future video. So I'm going to get set up to try one more cut on this piece. The last cut that I did was on this end. You can see that it's a hollow core piece of wood. Kind of interesting. So here's the uncut end. And so what I want to do as a kind of a sanity check is take my carpenter square and verify that these corners are indeed, these 2 edges rather, the short edge and the long edge, are indeed perpendicular to each other. And they look real good. So now I'm going to try and slice off 2 inches here, and we'll see if the cut end of the board is still perpendicular to this face. Here's the uncut edge. Alright, now let's check to see if this new cut edge is still square to the piece. It's very hard for you to see in the camera, but it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. So what I'm learning here is that when I remove the arm and I set up the fence using a carpenter square, I can get pretty decent results with long cuts without having to worry about creating any sort of a bind with that metal piece that's on the arm back here.